Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell had always believed that life-changing moments announced themselves with fanfare. She thought they would come with dramatic music, flashing lights, or at least some warning. She never imagined that the most important moment of her career would arrive while she was simply pouring coffee in the officers' mess at Naval Station Norfolk. The morning started like any other Tuesday in March. Sarah had been stationed at Norfolk for 8 months, working as a communications officer in the Atlantic Fleet Headquarters. At 26, she was one of the youngest officers in her division, and she felt the weight of proving herself every single day. Her colleagues respected her technical skills, but she knew that respect in the Navy had to be earned through more than just knowing how to operate radio equipment. The officers' mess buzzed with its usual morning energy. Pilots discussed weather conditions for training flights, intelligence officers huddled over classified reports, and administrative staff coordinated the day's meetings. Sarah moved through the familiar routine of her morning coffee ritual, a small comfort that reminded her of her civilian life before the Navy claimed her days. She had joined the service 3 years earlier, straight out of college with a degree in electrical engineering. Her father, a retired Marine sergeant, had encouraged her to serve her country, while her mother worried about her only daughter entering what was still largely a man's world. Sarah had proven herself capable during training, graduating near the top of her class at Officer Candidate School and excelling in her communications specialization. But Norfolk felt different from training. Here, she was no longer competing against fellow students. She was working alongside seasoned officers who had decades of experience, some of whom had served in combat zones she could only read about in reports. The weight of real responsibility pressed down on her shoulders daily. As she reached for the coffee pot, Sarah noticed Admiral Robert Chen entering the mess hall. The Admiral commanded respect simply by walking into a room. His presence changed the atmosphere immediately, causing conversations to lower and postures to straighten. He was known throughout the Atlantic Fleet as a fair but demanding leader, someone who had earned his position through merit and had little patience for incompetence. Sarah had only spoken to Admiral Chen once before, during a brief introduction when she first arrived at Norfolk. She remembered feeling nervous, stumbling slightly over her words as she recited her background and qualifications. The Admiral had listened politely, nodded, and moved on to the next officer. Since then, she had seen him in meetings and briefings, but always from a distance. The Admiral moved through the mess hall with purpose, greeting various officers along the way. Sarah focused on her coffee, trying not to appear obvious as she watched his progression through the room. She had learned that in the Navy, it was better to be prepared for any interaction, no matter how unlikely it seemed. The coffee pot was nearly empty, and Sarah tilted it carefully to capture the last few drops. The rich aroma filled her nostrils, a small pleasure in what promised to be another demanding day. She had 3 briefings scheduled, 2 equipment inspections to oversee, and a stack of communication protocols to review before evening. Behind her, she could hear the Admiral's voice as he spoke with Commander Williams about upcoming training exercises. The conversation seemed routine, the kind of operational discussion that filled the days of senior officers. Sarah paid it little attention, focused instead on adding cream to her coffee and preparing mentally for her first meeting. That was when everything changed. Ghostwriter. The Admiral's voice cut through the ambient noise of the mess hall like a blade. Sarah's hand froze mid-stir, the spoon suspended in her coffee cup. Ghostwriter was her call sign, the radio designation she had earned during a particularly challenging training exercise 2 years earlier. It was a name that few people knew and even fewer used in casual conversation. The room fell silent with an abruptness that seemed almost supernatural. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The clink of silverware against plates ceased. Even the hum of the coffee machine seemed to quiet. Sarah could feel the weight of dozens of eyes turning toward her, but she could not move. Her mind raced through possibilities. Had she made an error in her recent work? Was there some breach of protocol she had unknowingly committed? The Admiral rarely called junior officers by their call signs in public settings. This had to be something significant. Slowly, Sarah turned around, her coffee cup still clutched in her hands. Admiral Chen stood 10 feet away, his expression serious but not unkind. His eyes held an intensity that made Sarah feel as if he could see directly into her thoughts. "Yes, sir," she managed to say, her voice steadier than she felt. The Admiral stepped closer, and Sarah became acutely aware that every person in the mess hall was listening to their conversation. Senior officers who had been discussing classified operations now focused entirely on this interaction between the Admiral and a lieutenant they barely knew. "I need to see you in my office in 30 minutes, Admiral Chen said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "Bring your service record and your security clearance documentation." Sarah's heart began to pound. Requests for service records usually meant one of two things: promotion or trouble. Given the serious tone and the public nature of the summons, she feared it was the latter. "Yes, sir," she replied, hoping her voice didn't betray the anxiety building inside her. The Admiral nodded once and turned to leave, but then he paused and looked back at her. For a moment, his stern expression softened slightly, and Sarah thought she saw something that might have been encouragement in his eyes. "Ghost Rider," he said again, this time with what sounded almost like pride. 30 minutes. Then he was gone, leaving Sarah standing in the middle of the mess hall with her coffee growing cold and every eye in the room fixed on her. The silence stretched for several more seconds before conversations gradually resumed. Though she could tell that many of the discussions now centered around speculation about what the Admiral might want with Lieutenant Mitchell. Sarah set down her coffee cup with hands that trembled slightly. Whatever was about to happen would change everything. She could feel it in the air, in the way the morning light seemed different as it streamed through the mess hall windows, in the way her heartbeat echoed in her ears. She had 29 minutes to prepare herself for what might be the most important conversation of her military career. As she walked toward the door, Sarah Mitchell had no idea that she was about to be offered an opportunity that would test every skill she had learned and push her far beyond anything she thought herself capable of achieving. The hallway outside the mess hall stretched before her, leading toward Admiral Chen's office and whatever waited there. With each step, Sarah felt the weight of possibility and responsibility settling on her shoulders, heavier than any equipment she had ever carried, more significant than any mission she had ever imagined. Sarah's footsteps echoed down the polished corridor leading to Admiral Chen's office, each step measured and deliberate despite the chaos in her mind. She had retrieved her service record from her quarters and double-checked that her security clearance documentation was current. The manila folder felt heavier than it should have in her hands, as if it contained the weight of her entire future. The Admiral's secretary, a composed woman in her 50s named Mrs. Patterson, gestured for Sarah to take a seat in the waiting area. The chairs were standard military issue, but the office itself reflected the Admiral's status. Commendations and photographs lined the walls, showing decades of service and relationships with high-ranking officials from around the world. Sarah tried to calm her nerves by studying the photographs. There was Admiral Chen as a young lieutenant, standing proudly beside his first command. Another showed him shaking hands with the Secretary of Defense. A third captured him addressing a group of sailors on the deck of an aircraft carrier. Each image told a story of dedication and achievement that reminded Sarah how far she still had to go in her own career. "The Admiral will see you now," Mrs. Patterson announced, her voice neutral but not unkind. Sarah stood, straightened her uniform one final time, and walked through the heavy wooden door into Admiral Chen's office. The room was larger than she had expected, with windows overlooking the harbor where naval vessels moved in and out like chess pieces on a vast board. Admiral Chen sat behind an imposing desk, but he gestured for Sarah to take a seat in one of the chairs positioned in front of it. The arrangement felt less formal than she had anticipated, though the Admiral's expression remained serious. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he began, his voice carrying the same authority she had heard in the mess hall. "What do you know about Operation Deep Current?" Sarah searched her memory quickly. The name was unfamiliar, which likely meant it was classified above her current clearance level. "I'm not familiar with that operation, sir." The Admiral nodded, as if her answer confirmed something he had expected. He opened a thick folder on his desk and studied its contents for a moment before looking back at her. Operation Deep Current is a joint intelligence operation involving the Navy, CIA, and our allies in the Pacific region. For the past 18 months, we have been tracking a sophisticated communication network used by hostile forces to coordinate activities that threaten American interests and those of our partners. Sarah listened intently, wondering why she was being briefed on such sensitive information. Her own clearance level allowed her access to important operational details, but this sounded like something far beyond her usual scope of responsibility. "The communication network," Admiral Chen continued, "uses a complex system of encrypted messages transmitted through various channels. Traditional interception methods have proven largely ineffective. The hostile forces have developed techniques that make their communications nearly invisible to conventional monitoring." The Admiral paused and fixed Sarah with a direct stare. "Nearly invisible, Lieutenant, but not completely invisible to someone with your particular skills and background." Sarah felt a surge of confusion mixed with excitement. "Sir, I'm not sure I understand what specific qualifications you're referring to." Admiral Chen smiled for the first time since she had entered his office. It was a slight expression, but it transformed his entire demeanor. "Lieutenant, you have an unusual combination of technical expertise and operational capability. Your undergraduate work in electrical engineering focused on signal processing and encryption. Your military training emphasized communications in challenging environments. But what sets you apart is something that doesn't appear in your official record." The Admiral reached into his desk and withdrew another folder, this one marked with classification levels that made Sarah's eyes widen. "During your training exercises, you demonstrated an ability to identify patterns in communication traffic that others missed. Your instructors noted that you seemed to have an intuitive understanding of how hostile forces might attempt to disguise their transmissions." Sarah remembered the exercises he was referencing. She had always been good at finding the signals that didn't quite fit, the transmissions that seemed normal on the surface but contained subtle irregularities that suggested hidden content. She had never considered it a special talent, just careful attention to detail. Operation Deep Current requires someone who can work independently in a high-stress environment, someone who can adapt quickly to changing circumstances, and someone who can maintain operational security while working with minimal supervision. Admiral Chen leaned forward slightly. "Based on your record and the recommendations of your training officers, we believe you are that person." The magnitude of what he was suggesting began to dawn on Sarah. This wasn't just another assignment. This was an opportunity to work on something that could have real strategic importance for national security. "Sir, what exactly would my role be in this operation?" Admiral Chen stood and walked to the window overlooking the harbor. "You would be assigned to a joint task force operating in the Western Pacific. Your primary responsibility would be to monitor and analyze communication patterns from a forward position that provides optimal access to the hostile network." He turned back to face her, his expression serious once again. "I won't mislead you, Lieutenant. This assignment involves significant personal risk. You would be operating in an environment where the margin for error is extremely small. The work is demanding, the hours are long, and the isolation can be psychologically challenging." Sarah felt her heart racing, but not from fear. For the first time since arriving at Norfolk, she was being offered the chance to do something that truly mattered, something that would test every skill she had developed during her training. The assignment would require immediate deployment, Admiral Chen continued. If you accept, you would leave Norfolk within 72 hours for specialized briefings and preparation. From there, you would deploy to your operational position within 2 weeks. The Admiral returned to his desk and sat down, studying Sarah's face carefully. This is not an order, Lieutenant. The nature of this mission requires someone who chooses to accept it willingly. You have the right to decline without any negative impact on your career. Sarah thought about her parents, about the comfortable routine she had established at Norfolk, about the friends she was beginning to make among her fellow officers. Then she thought about the reason she had joined the Navy in the first place, the desire to serve something larger than herself and to make a meaningful contribution to her country's security. Admiral, may I ask how long the deployment would last? Initially, 6 months, he replied. But depending on operational requirements and your effectiveness in the role, it could extend to a full year or longer. Sarah took a deep breath. Sir, what made you think of me for this assignment? There must be other officers with more experience who could handle this kind of responsibility. The Admiral's expression softened again, and for a moment he looked less like a commanding officer and more like a mentor. Lieutenant, experience is valuable, but it's not the only qualification that matters. Sometimes the most important quality an officer can possess is the willingness to step forward when something important needs to be done, even when it's difficult or dangerous. He gestured toward the photographs on his wall. Every significant achievement in my career began with someone offering me an opportunity that seemed beyond my capabilities at the time. The question isn't whether you're ready for this assignment. The question is whether you're willing to discover what you're capable of achieving. Sarah looked at the folder of documents in her lap, then back at Admiral Chen. She thought about Ghost Rider, the call sign that had been earned through her performance under pressure. She thought about the training that had prepared her for exactly this kind of challenge. Admiral, she said, her voice steady and clear, I accept the assignment. The Admiral nodded, and Sarah thought she saw a flash of approval in his eyes. Very well, Lieutenant. Mrs. Patterson will provide you with your initial briefing materials and travel orders. Report to Building 247 tomorrow at 800 for your first specialized briefing. As Sarah stood to leave, Admiral Chen added, Lieutenant Mitchell, this conversation and everything we've discussed is classified at the highest level. You are not to discuss any aspect of Operation Deep Current with anyone who is not explicitly authorized to know about it. Understood, sir. One more thing, the Admiral said as she reached the door. Ghost Rider is an appropriate call sign for this mission. You're going to need to move like a ghost and strike like lightning. Sarah left the Admiral's office with her mind reeling from the implications of what she had just accepted. In less than an hour, her entire future had changed direction. The comfortable routine of Norfolk was about to become a memory, replaced by something far more demanding and dangerous than anything she had previously experienced. As she walked back through the corridors, Sarah realized that the woman who had poured coffee in the mess hall that morning was already fading into the past. The person she was becoming would need to be stronger, smarter, and more capable than she had ever imagined possible. The transformation had already begun. 3 months later, Sarah crouched in the cramped communications bunker carved into a rocky hillside overlooking the South China Sea. The facility was so classified that it didn't appear on any official maps, known only by its operational designation, Station Echo 7. Her workspace consisted of sophisticated monitoring equipment that could intercept and analyze communications across hundreds of frequencies, all powered by generators that hummed constantly beneath the ground. The isolation was more complete than Admiral Chen had warned her about. Sarah's only human contact came through brief encrypted communications with her handlers and the occasional visit from supply personnel who arrived by helicopter under cover of darkness. She had been at Station Echo 7 for 10 weeks, and the psychological pressure of working alone while maintaining constant vigilance was beginning to test her limits. But the work itself had proven more engaging than she had dared to hope. The hostile communication network that Operation Deep Current was designed to penetrate had revealed itself to be even more sophisticated than intelligence analysts had suspected. The enemy was using a combination of frequency hopping, encryption, and steganography that created multiple layers of concealment for their messages. Sarah had spent her first month at the station simply learning to recognize the patterns that indicated hidden communications were present. The hostile forces transmitted their real messages within seemingly innocent commercial radio traffic, disguising operational orders as shipping manifests and weather reports. It had taken weeks of careful analysis before Sarah began to identify the subtle timing patterns and frequency variations that marked the presence of concealed content. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday evening when Sarah was monitoring routine maritime communications. She had been tracking what appeared to be a series of cargo ship position reports when she noticed irregularities in the transmission timing. The reports were arriving exactly 17 seconds apart, a precision that was unusual for normal commercial traffic. Working through the night, Sarah analyzed the pattern and discovered that the 17-second intervals corresponded to a mathematical sequence that could be used to decode hidden messages embedded in the routine transmissions. It was an elegant system that would have been virtually impossible to detect without understanding the specific timing key. Once she identified the basic pattern, Sarah was able to begin intercepting and decoding the hidden communications. What she discovered sent a chill down her spine. The hostile network was coordinating a series of operations designed to disrupt shipping lanes throughout the Western Pacific, potentially affecting billions of dollars in international trade and threatening the stability of allied nations in the region. The intercepted messages revealed detailed plans for synchronized attacks on commercial vessels, sabotage of port facilities, and the deployment of sophisticated underwater mines in strategic choke points. The scope and coordination of the planned operations indicated a level of organization and capability that exceeded previous intelligence estimates. Sarah transmitted her findings through encrypted channels to the Joint Task Force Command, knowing that her discovery would trigger immediate action at the highest levels of government. Within hours, she received confirmation that her intelligence was being used to coordinate defensive measures and counter-operations across the Pacific region. But the hostile forces were not passive targets. As Sarah continued her interception work, she began to notice changes in the communication patterns that suggested her activities might have been detected. The timing intervals started to shift, and new encryption methods appeared that were designed to defeat the analytical techniques she had been using. The realization that she might be in a technological chess match with enemy communications specialists added a new dimension of stress to her already demanding work. Every breakthrough in decoding their messages was followed by adaptations that forced her to develop new approaches. It became a constant cycle of discovery, adaptation, and counter-adaptation that required all of her technical skills and creative thinking. The psychological pressure intensified when Sarah began receiving indirect evidence that the hostile forces were actively searching for her station. Reconnaissance aircraft appeared more frequently in the area, and her electronic surveillance equipment detected scanning signals that suggested someone was trying to locate the source of the interception activities. One night, in her 12th week at Station Echo 7, Sarah was working on a particularly complex message when her equipment detected an unusual signal pattern approaching the station. The signature was unlike anything she had seen before, but her training in electronic warfare recognition made her immediately suspicious. Following emergency protocols, Sarah activated the station's defensive systems and sent an urgent alert to her handlers. Within minutes, She received orders to prepare for immediate evacuation while maintaining her monitoring activities as long as possible. The next several hours tested every aspect of Sarah's training and personal courage. While preparing to destroy sensitive equipment and evacuate the station, she continued intercepting and analyzing communications that revealed the hostile forces were indeed closing in on her position. They had developed new direction-finding techniques specifically designed to locate hidden monitoring stations. As the evacuation helicopter approached Station Echo 7, Sarah made a critical decision. Instead of destroying all of her equipment as protocol required, she chose to preserve the analytical software and databases she had developed during her months of work. The information was too valuable to lose, but keeping it meant accepting additional personal risk during the evacuation. The helicopter extraction took place under hostile fire, with enemy forces having located the station just hours before Sarah's departure. As she flew away from Station Echo 7, Sarah could see explosions lighting up the hillside where she had spent the most intense and productive months of her career. Back at the Joint Task Force headquarters, Sarah's debriefing lasted for 3 days. Intelligence analysts were amazed by the depth and quality of the information she had gathered, particularly her insights into the hostile communication methods and her predictions about future operational patterns. Admiral Chen arrived for the final debriefing session, the first time Sarah had seen him since accepting the assignment. His presence reminded her of that morning in the mess hall when her life had changed with the utterance of her call sign. "Lieutenant," he said as they sat in the secure briefing room, "your work at Station Echo 7 prevented what could have been a catastrophic series of attacks on international shipping. The intelligence you gathered has been used to prevent attacks on 17 commercial vessels and has led to the disruption of hostile operations across the entire Western Pacific region." Sarah felt a sense of pride and accomplishment unlike anything she had experienced before. The months of isolation, the psychological pressure, and the physical dangers had all been worth it for this moment of knowing that her work had made a real difference. "Moreover," Admiral Chen continued, "the analytical techniques you developed have been adopted as standard procedures for similar operations. Your innovations in pattern recognition and communication analysis have advanced our capabilities significantly." The Admiral paused and looked at Sarah with an expression that combined professional respect with personal admiration. "Ghost Rider, you have exceeded every expectation we had when we selected you for this mission. You have proven yourself to be exactly the kind of officer the Navy needs for the challenges we face in modern warfare." As Sarah left the briefing room, she reflected on the transformation that had begun with a simple moment of pouring coffee. The young lieutenant who had frozen at the sound of her call sign had become someone capable of operating independently in the most demanding circumstances, someone who could adapt and innovate under pressure, someone who could make decisions that affected national security. The assignment had changed more than just her career trajectory. It had shown her capabilities she never knew she possessed and given her confidence that she could handle whatever challenges lay ahead. When she looked in the mirror now, Sarah saw not just a naval officer, but a professional who had proven herself in the most demanding circumstances imaginable. Admiral Chen's words echoed in her mind as she walked through the corridors of the headquarters building. She was exactly the kind of officer the Navy needed. More importantly, she had discovered that she was exactly the kind of person she had always hoped to become. The coffee cup was long forgotten, but the moment when everything changed would stay with her forever. A reminder that the most important opportunities often arrive without warning and require the courage to step forward into the unknown. Ghost Rider had found her true calling, and her career was just beginning.